Today I'm going to be fixing some of the terrible code that I've written for my Chrome extension. Before we go through the code, I just want to briefly explain how the project works. The code that we'll be looking at today belongs to the NodeJS server, which is really the driver of the whole project. At scheduled intervals, the backend server sends requests to the external API for data used by the Chrome extension. After the response is received, this data will then be reformatted and stored in the MongoDB database. Then, when a user opens the Chrome extension, several requests for data will be sent from the Chrome extension to the Node.js server. In response, the server will run a query on the database and return the results. When building the application, I committed probably one of the biggest mistakes you can as a developer. I built the application in a way that requires a manual code change every 6 months. To calculate all of the date strings, I was using my local time zone, which was affected by daylight savings time. So twice a year, all of the date times would change by 1 hour. As a result, I had to set an alert on my phone for those 2 dates so the application wouldn't be displaying the incorrect time. The second major issue, which I've listed here, comes from the discrepancy between the time zone used by the external API and the time zone used by the server's virtual machine. The virtual machine that the Node.js server runs on uses UTC, while the external API sends all of the data in a time zone that is 7 hours ahead. I think walking through an example would probably be the best way of explaining why this creates complications. So my Chrome extension displays scores and standings from the National Hockey League. When retrieving the live scores data from the external API, I need to include the date as part of the request. So if I want all of the scores from games on April 1st, I need to pass in April 1st as the date parameter. This sounds simple enough, but becomes complicated when you realize that the games that are on April 1st in my time zone are actually on April 2nd in the time zone used by the external API. It's even worse for UTC. If you look at the table, halfway through the period in which games are being played, the date changes. As a result, I had to include a lot of code to make sure I'm using the correct date as part of the request to the API. So how can we solve this problem? So this chaos would be a lot simpler if the same time zone was used within the Node.js server and also within the data returned by the API. Luckily, the external API has recently added an optional parameter for the scores endpoint that I'm using. So now I can pass in a custom time zone and all of the scores data will be returned with that time zone in mind. This makes my life easier and means I can clean up a lot of this garbage code. The first code change I made was to make use of this new optional parameter as you see here. The next step was to update all of the hard-coded values to be in Pacific Standard Time, which is the time zone that I've decided to use. The major reason for picking PST is that within this time zone, all games will start and end on the same day, so I no longer have to worry about using yesterday's date when getting the live scoring data. One thing you'll notice about this code, if you look on the left side of the screen, is that previously I actually had to handle 2 different time zones. When I was running the server locally on my computer, the time zone would be my local time, Eastern US time, but when the server was running on the virtual machine, UTC would be used instead. This code is no longer needed. In order to support any time zone that a user might be in my response to the Chrome extension, I include the full date string for the start time of every game. Then from the front end, I can use basic JavaScript functions to convert this date time to be in the local time zone of the user. You'll notice in the code here that I previously had to convert the current date to yesterday's date. This definitely got complicated since yesterday's date could be a different month or even a different year. Now, as you'll see on the right, I can simply just use the date included in the data from the API, which makes a much cleaner function. When using the native date objects and functions included in JavaScript, they will always return the date in the local time zone. This is why I had to support both my own local time and the local time zone of the virtual machine. So in order to convert my code to use a single time zone, I had to write a utility function that will return the date in the time zone that I want. The function you see here will now be used everywhere in the application to get the current date and time in PST. The code changes that you see here are a few of the places where I replaced the native JavaScript functions with my utility function from the previous slide. Probably my favorite part of these code changes is how much code I was able to remove altogether. I was able to decrease the size of my codebase by several hundred lines. As a result of these code changes, I now have a cleaner code base, less maintenance is required, and there's a lower probability of bugs regarding dates or times. Since there aren't any National Hockey League games during the summer, I consider it sort of the off-season for my Chrome extension. It's usually when I implement all of the major changes for the project. So the code changes that we've looked at today will be a part of the version 3.0 release, which is scheduled for September of this year. This will give me about a month between the timing of this release and when the regular season actually starts. The list that you're seeing here includes some of the major changes that I'm planning on implementing throughout the summer. Additionally, I'll also be making more videos just like this one, where I walk you through the code and explain what's going on behind the scenes. If this is something that you found interesting, feel free to subscribe. The next video in this series is going to be implementing more automation within the NodeJS server. Thanks for watching and have a great day.